My daughter is learning to drive right now. She's taking driver's training. And she's a very good driver, some groans, but she's good. She's better than a lot of these jokers I see on the road. And it's interesting as we're going through, she has to have so many hours with her parent or guardian or whatever and in the car. And it's interesting because there's things that we have to teach about driving that, after you've driven for so many years, you don't think about having to teach. You just kind of do it automatically. And so we were driving the other day, and there's a little beeping sound, and Elena says, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, we need gas." She goes, "Oh, well, what do we do?" I said, "Well, pull into the gas station and drive in this part. Make sure you park your car here, and it's on this side." And I say, "Now we got to fill up." And she goes, how do I do that?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, well, I don't think about that. Here's how we do it. You get out, you pick the type of gas you want. Don't ever put the diesel in. Stay away from that. Don't put that in. But slide your card through, pick the kind you want. Here's the kind you want. You get the pump, you get the handle, you got to unscrew the thing and put it in." And it's all these things that we just take for granted, but we have to learn. It's filling up your gas tank is an important part of driving, right? If you can learn all you want about your car and how to take care of it and how to clean it and all the parts in it, but if you don't learn how to put gas in it, you're not going to go very far. It's gonna get stalled out somewhere. It's important for cars, obviously, to fill it up with gas. It's what cars need to run, and it's also important for us too. We think, we have to take care of our car because it runs on gas. Well, what about ourselves? How are we taking care of ourselves? What are we putting into ourselves to make sure we're running properly? We have, of course, food to take care of our physical bodies, and we need food, obviously, right, to take care of our physical bodies. But what about our emotional selves? What about our psychological selves? What about our spiritual selves? What are we doing to fill up our spiritual lives? Or for many of us, are we just running on empty? Do we feel like, the spiritual gas tank is completely empty, and I don't have anything in the tank? And many of us are feeling that. We are a part of a culture where everything is just go, 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 nonstop. And there's more things showing up every single week that's going to take up our time and take up our attention. And our culture, like I said, is just going nonstop, filling up every single minute with all sorts of things. And lo and behold, many of us are burnt out, we're depressed, we're tired, we find ourselves just not caring about things anymore. We don't care about others, we don't care about ourselves, we're exhausted. And all these things are symptoms that we need a fill up. All those things are the little light on your dashboard flashing. I need a fill up here. Pull over. Give me something here. A lot of us, like I say, are driving on empty. The needle is bottomed out on E. It's been on E for years. Maybe for some of you, the needle broke off a long time ago, and you just keep going on it. Or for a lot of us, some of us we've stalled out a long time ago, broke down at the side of the road. We need to take care of our cars in order to keep them running properly. And I want to tell us today, or remind us, I guess, we need to take care of ourselves in order to keep ourselves running properly. Just as important as gas is for your car, we need to take care of not only our physical bodies, but our spiritual bodies as well. So what do we put in our spiritual gas tank? How do we even do that? Is there a spiritual gas station? What is there spiritual gas? What are we putting in our spiritual gas tanks, and how do we do it? Because just like our cars, it's hugely important what you put into it. If you pull up and you put diesel in your car, it's not going to be good. Remember the movie Back to the Future 2? If you know Back to the Future, Doc Brown comes from the future, and he's got this cool futuristic DeLorean, and he needs to fill up his gas tank. This is very early in the movie, and Marty McFly says, "Well, how are we going to fill up the car?" And he says, "Well, it's the future. Cars run on garbage." And he opens up this can of garbage, and he's throwing banana peels and coffee grinds in this car. And I always thought, well, that'd be cool. It'd be nice if cars would run on garbage. They haven't figured that out yet. I'm waiting for them to figure out how to get cars to run on garbage. But we haven't got there yet. And yet, many of us treat ourselves, our bodies, like that car. We're trying to fill up our spiritual tanks on garbage. And it's like, well, wait a second. We weren't designed to run on garbage. We weren't meant to run on garbage. So what's all the stuff we're putting in our spiritual gas tanks? I had a friend who would come over all the time. I had an apartment before I was married. I was young and didn't have a care in the world. And the apartment, just people would just come and go, and some people would stay there for months at a time. And I had this guy that was staying there for a few months. And every day, he would drink 6 Dr. Peppers. Like from evening to night, he would drink 6 Dr. Peppers. And just constantly drinking Dr. Peppers. And finally I said, wow, you're a real big fan of Dr. Pepper. I said, wow, how can you drink so much? And he goes, and as he's drinking a Dr. Pepper, he says, I'm thirsty. He says, I'm just always thirsty. And I remember thinking, well, you're giving your body Dr. Pepper. Like, your body's like dying of thirst, is saying, give me water. Please, no, I need water. And he keeps giving it Dr. Pepper. And he's wondering, why am I so thirsty? I'm drinking nonstop. Your body's like, you're killing me here. Just give me a drop of water. You're not giving your body what it actually needs. But it's the same thing with us. It's how we treat our spiritual gas tanks, right? Our emotional gas tanks, our psychological gas tanks. We're filling it up on Facebook and television and Netflix, and we're filling it up on games and or news or podcasts, or maybe we fill it up on work. We're workaholics, or maybe we fill it up with nothing. We're just time wasters, dinking around, waiting for the next email to come through, or scrolling through YouTube, or going to the end of Reddit, or whatever it is. And we wonder, what's this garbage I'm giving myself, And your body's saying, no, this is not what I need. This is not what I was designed for. All those things are fine in their own right. I'm not harping on Facebook or TV or Netflix or anything like that. But you weren't meant to run on that stuff. That's not the stuff you were meant to put in your spiritual gas tank. So what do we run on? What should we run on? And I'm not talking about physically. Obviously, we need food for that. That's important. What do we run on spiritually? And I want to tell you today that our cars run on gas. We run on grace. We are grace machines. We're meant to be run on the grace of God. And we're meant to have a continual filling up of God's grace in order to keep running properly. It's what we depend on. It's what we were designed for. We're little God machines. And we need fill up of God in order to run properly. When we're full, when our grace tanks are full, we are more loving, we're more caring, we're more compassionate, we feel worth, we feel loved, we can act selflessly, we can give, we're able to forgive easily, and it's all when we're filled up with grace. We become more like what we're supposed to be. But when our grace tanks are empty, we get short-tempered, we're more easily angered, we get depressed, we get burnt out, we feel empty, we feel purposeless, we feel, like I said, uncaring about ourselves, uncaring about others. And what I want to remind us is we need a grace fill-up. We need to fill up our grace tanks. We're talking about a very old concept this series, a very kind of ancient concept, and the church has always called it the means of grace, which is a confusing phrase. The means of grace. What does that mean? The means of grace. The means of grace is things that we can do in order to access God's grace. So the means is or how you get something or how you do something. So the means of grace is how you can access God's grace. God has all this grace. We need the grace. How do we get the grace? Well, we have what we call the means of grace, the way of getting it. Here's the mistake we typically make when we feel burnt out, when we recognize that our tank's on empty. Sometimes what we try to do is we try to power through it, right? We try to of our own strength fill up the gas tank, but we can't fill up the gas tank. So all we end up trying to do is trying to move the needle. Our needle's on E, and we get in front of this needle and we try to move it. But we all know that just moving the needle, that doesn't actually fill up the tank, right? just moving the needle, all you're doing is trying to manipulate the situation. We don't need to just move that needle. We need to actually fill up our gas tanks. Like I said, we need a way of accessing the grace that God has. And the good news is there are several ways of doing it. There are several means of grace. There are several ways we can get God's grace from God into us. And that's what we're going to be looking at this series. And I encourage you to come each week and find out about all the different kinds of all the different means of grace. And the first one I want to look at today is one that there's some means of grace you can do by yourself, some we have to do in community. This first one we're looking at today might seem like an obvious means of grace, a way of getting God's grace into our lives, and that is going to church. And again, going to church, a way of accessing God's grace, a means to get His grace to our lives. And like I said, it might seem obvious. And I think I'm preaching to the choir because you're already in church, right? Oh, okay, I'm church. Okay, good, I did that one. Good job. Let's look at Hebrews. The verse in Hebrews here. It's in your insert. This is Hebrews 10 here, and the writer of Hebrews writes. We don't exactly know who wrote Hebrews, so he or she either writes, as a reminder, let us draw near to God with us, because He has the grace, right? Let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess. For He who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Sometimes we talk about church attendance, and we can look at it and say, look, maybe the modern church in America, we think, church attendance on a whole is on a decline. You know, not many people are going to church. A lot of people are giving up church attendance, and some of us think, well, this is a modern phenomenon. But even here, the writer of Hebrews, way back a couple years after Jesus died, he says, don't ever give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing. So it seems to be just a reoccurring issue, that some are in the habit of giving up going to church, right? Giving up meeting together. And the writer wants to say to us, don't give that up. The King James says, do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. Don't give up meeting together, because this is one of the ways we can access God's grace. One of the things that we need to be reminded of, though, is that just because we are in church, we've come to church, doesn't automatically mean, okay, now I guess my grace tanks are filled, right? Because I went to church and I can check that off. And it's not an automatic thing. Just in the same way, you can't just pull into a gas station and that means automatically your car's filled up, right? You've got to get out, unless you get to one of those places that do it with the employees, but forget about those places. You go to a gas station, right? You get out of the car, you pay for the gas, you choose the gas, right? And then you got to do some things for the gas to get in the car. So just because you come to church doesn't mean you are automatically filled up with the grace. I mean, we have to do something. Yes, we need to come together. That is essential. We need to assemble together, but we also need to participate. If it's going to mean anything, just sitting in church is not the thing that does it. It needs to be a personal act. We need to personally participate in the assembling of ourselves. The writer of Hebrews says, spur one another on. Be there for one another. Encourage one another, and all the more so as you see the day approaching. The point, I think, is it's not about just you. It's about coming together with others who are also on this journey. There are some people who will say, I don't need to go to church to go to heaven, or I don't need to go to church. It's a personal thing. It's between me and God. And it's like, well, yes and no. Yes, it is a personal relationship between you and God, but we are called to come together as a community. We're called to be a part of a new family. And there's things that we need to do together that we can't just do all by ourselves. We praise God together. We encourage people together. We walk with one another together. We take communion together. I mean, communion, the word means, a community. You can't just do these things all on your own. We need encouragement. We need one another. You're an essential part of this assembly. You sitting here, you're an essential part to what we're doing here. And you say, well, not so much me, I just kind of sit here. Well, you should probably do more stuff than just sit there, but you really are an essential part. There's something in your life that someone else here needs. There's some gift that you have that we are lacking in the church. There's some experience that you've gone through that, like the writer of Hebrews says, someone else here needs encouragement to get through. Someone here is maybe going through some financial hardships. And you could say, yeah, I went through financial hardships, pretty terrible ones. But you know what? You'll get through it. And I'm here for you. And what do you need? And can I help you? Somebody is going through, a sickness. And someone will say, well, yeah, I went through that as well. Someone has experienced a death. And someone here can say, yes, I've been there. It hurts terribly, but God was with me through it. And we need to hear that. Some of the things that we go through in life, we wonder, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And maybe it's not the reason it's happening to you, but God is going to use that experience for someone else down the road, that you'll be able to walk with them through that and encourage them through that. And so not only do we need encouragement from others, but we're called to give encouragement to others. And you might feel like you're not really participating here, and I would encourage you, like I said, to participate more, but we need you here. With you not here, we're missing out on a part of what we need to have church together. We live in a me culture. I mean, that church hunters that we were watching. It's all about them, right? It's all about what do they want? And does this church tick all my check boxes? And if it doesn't, well, there's a church down the road. I'll find one that does, right? Or maybe you've searched for 10 churches and you say, I guess no church does, I'll just stay home. But it's all about, because we live in this me culture. And in this culture, it's all about me. We see a church and we ask, well, what can this church give me? How can this church fulfill what I want? And if they don't fulfill what I want, well, I'll either, cause a fuss or I'll go somewhere else. But a lot of people will say, what can I get? Look at Centerpointe. Why would I go to Centerpointe Church? I'll listen to a sermon, but with the click of a button right now, you could listen to a much better sermon by much better pastors, right? Thank you. Somebody says no. There's much better preachers out there who give much better sermons, right? So why would I go to Centerpointe? There are. It's an objective fact. So why would I, our worship team is great, right? But there's better worship music out there, and with a click of a button, you guys did a great job today, worship team. But if I wanted to, I could listen to professionals, and I could. So why would I go here? You know what I mean? There's better things out. There's better options. There's this big buffet, and what's the point? Why am I going to this place? And the pastor's going to preach on something maybe I don't want to hear. And what I have the ability to say, I'll just listen to a sermon that I want to hear, and I'll listen to someone saying what I agree with. And I'll only listen to what I want to hear, and everything agrees with me, and I can just do what I want. We can do that, and that's what we're tempted to do when we live in this me culture, and we make church about me. We have this phrase, we call it a church service, or we call it a worship service, right? And it's a confusing term, because in the me culture, service means I'm served, right? I go to a restaurant and the waiter or waitress or the server serves me, and I get what I want. And if I don't get what I want, then I complain to the manager. But service means you I come to your place and you serve me. That's what service means in the me culture. Back in the day, the church didn't have this problem. The Hebrew word, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and this is the same true for the Old Testament synagogues when they would come together, and the New Testament church as they would come together. The Hebrew word for service is the exact same Hebrew word for worship. There's not two different words in the Hebrew language. If you're going to service, they understood you're going to worship. And worship doesn't mean you serve me, right? Service doesn't mean I am being served. Worship service means I'm here to serve God. I'm here not for me, but for Him. I don't come to church to be worshiped. I come to church to worship God. And remember, in the Hebrew language, it's the same word for worship, and service is the same word. The idea is we are offering ourselves up for His service, not coming here to be served by somebody and then getting angry when we don't get what we want. No, it is about God, amen, not about us. There was a guy got on the plane just this last week, and I was sitting next to a guy on the plane, he was a young guy who was in his early 30s, and he was really a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, he was the CEO of this tech startup, and he was going to change the world with this app that he's making, and he's on to sell everyone about this app, and it sounded like an interesting app. I grant him that. And we had this interesting conversation about everything that he does and how he excited he is. And then he said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a pastor. He says, oh. And then the conversation kind of went quiet for a little bit. And he said, this is very interesting. He says, oh, okay, church. He says, church. He goes, I've never been in a church. He goes, I see him all over the place. This is a guy in his 30s, the CEO of this company. He goes, I've never been in a church, but I see him everywhere. And he said, so what do you do in there? And he says, and he was asking me, what do I do as a pastor? And I said, well, I give a sermon. I'm just trying to this is basic stuff. He says, sermon? And I said, yeah, it's like I get up and I teach. Sometimes I'll tell stories. And he says, that sounds weird. And I said, well, have you ever heard a TED Talk? He says, yeah, I love TED Talks. I said, it's like that. A sermon's like a TED Talk. He says, oh, okay, well, that sounds kind of cool. But then he says, well, what happens inside the church? I said, you really never been in a church? Never a wedding, a funeral? He said, no, not inside a church. I thought, oh, this is interesting. Well, what do we do in church? And what do we do in church? If someone were to ask you, what do we do? Well, we come together. We do what the church has always been doing. And even going back to the Old Testament synagogues, we praise and worship. No matter where we're at in life, like I was saying, we offer our praise to God. We worship God. And as Crystal structures the songs, typically there's songs of praise she'll typically start with, and there's also songs of worship, because those are two different things. We praise God and we offer Him worship, meaning we lay ourselves down before God. Then what else do we do? There's the proclamation of God's word, which has always been the way the church does it. We have a reading of the scriptures and explain of what these scriptures mean, how it applies to our life, and we also do communion. These are things that the church has always been doing. Communion, we reenact the Lord's Supper with the bread and the cup. And it's a time for us to, again, I say this a lot, but it's a time for us to renew our commitment to God, a renewal to Him. We're renewing our relationship with Him. We're saying yet again, God, we accept everything that you did for us. You gave us all this freely, and God, this is a time for me to quiet down and saying, I got a little bit on the wrong track. I'm going to recommit myself to you. But that's what we do in church, and that's always what we've done. And that whole thing, coming together as a church, like I said, is a means of grace. It's a way that people have recognized this is a way we can get God's grace into our lives. It's a place we come, we let our walls down so His grace can come flooding in. And it's not because the building is special or anything about this physical place is special. It's an okay building, but the reason that it's special is because we have all as followers of Christ, have come together for one purpose, and that is we're going to worship God together. And when we all come together, people redeemed from the world are coming and worshiping God. God's grace is present here for us, and it's a means of grace. And this is something, like I said before, that you don't do alone. You can't do alone. We need one another for this to happen. You're an essential part. Even if you are just the bump on the log who just sits there, you're still an essential part. We come together and we worship God. And it's another reminder, I think, for us about what the church is supposed to be. The church, the gathering together of God's people, which we could do anywhere, by the way. We could do it outside. We could do it at somebody's house. We could do it anywhere. We're together. The church gathered together is not the destination. The church is not where we're supposed to end up. If anything, it's the gas station, right? It's the grace station. It's the place we go to get filled up to go to the destination. It's the place we have to stop at every once in a while, and we do once a week. The church has always been doing it once a week. The place we stop at to get the fill up to continue on the journey. Wouldn't it be strange if I said to the kids, we're going on a great journey. It's going to be very exciting. Pack up your bags. We pack up our bags. We pack up the tent. We pack up everything into the car. We load it up. We've got our snacks here. We've got our beverages. Okay, we've got the music. Turn it on. Okay, here we go. And we drive down the road, and I pull into the Shell gas station. I say, here we are. We've got to the destination. You say, well, wait a second. You're confusing the gas station, the place you're filling up, with where you're supposed to be going. And sometimes we do that with the church. We think that the church is as great as it is somehow the destination, and this is the goal. And as long as we get there, we're going to be okay, and we make sure everybody has to get to church. And I want to say, the church isn't the destination. It's the grace station. It's the place that we need to go to get filled up so we can continue doing our mission, which is out there. So we can each individually go into our own lives and bring God's grace into our own lives, which is the journey. That is the destination, is wherever God has you in life. But never forget and never forsake, like Hebrews says, the assembling together. Never forsake getting together and getting that fill up of grace. Never forsake coming together and worshiping God together with one voice. But this is not the destination. This is just the gas station, the grace station on the way out there. This guy on the plane is a very interesting guy because he's very tech-minded, very business-minded, and he wanted to give me all sorts of insights into the way you can succeed in life. And he said, church. And as we were talking about church and what it was, he says, boy, that'd be tough to run a church. And he's thinking about it. You can see him thinking about it in his head. He goes, I can't imagine all the competition you must have as a church. There's churches everywhere. You know, I see them all over the place. There's a ton of them in my city. He goes, what are you doing as a church to beat the competition, to beat all those other churches? And I said, well, we don't really think like that in the church world. He goes, well, we think like that in the tech world. We have to be better than that guy and better than that guy. I said, no, those churches that you see, we're all one big family. And those are our brothers and sisters, or maybe some of them are our cousins, some of them are our distant cousins. But but they're all part of our family. And that's not our competition. He says, I said, you know what our competition is? Our competition is this culture that makes everybody so busy and works everybody to death. Our competition is this idea that everything's about me, everything's about us. Our competition is apps like you that take people away from community. I didn't say that, but in my head I was. But that's our competition, not other churches, for crying out loud. It's this culture that wants to isolate us. It wants to keep us away from God's grace, that wants to keep us away from everybody else. We need to get a fill up, and I encourage you to get a fill up today. And again, it's just simply coming together, worshiping Him, offering ourselves to Him simply in worship, right? Offering ourselves to Him simply in saying, God, I am your servant. You're not my servant. God, I'm here not to be served. I'm here to serve you. Where do you want me in this life that you have me in? Because He's the one who deserves our worship. He's the one who deserves our service. And what do we find when we lay down our lives, when we drop down our walls and let his grace come in? We find an overabundance of grace. He has more grace than our tanks could possibly hold in our lives. And it's such a temptation. It's a sad thing when we're going through something hard in our lives, when we feel burnt out, when our tank's getting low, there's a strong temptation for us to say, well, I can't go to church. I don't feel like going to church now. Maybe when I feel it, I just can't get in there now. And we end up cutting church out. It was one of the first things that goes. And it's sad, I say, because that's one of the first places you need to go when you are feeling low on grace, is to exactly be in the place where you can get God's grace. Like the writer of Hebrews says, don't forsake it. No matter what you're going through, don't forsake the assembly. Don't give up meeting together. If your tank is empty, you go to the gas station, right? If your grace tank is empty, you go to the grace station. And sometimes I'll talk to people that haven't been in church for a while. They've been going through something very difficult. And most of the time, when they decide to, say, okay, I'll go back to church, almost immediately they think, why did I wait so long? What was I thinking staying away for so long? Sometimes it's right when they walk in the place, they feel, oh my word, what was I doing? I needed this. Sometimes it's the very first song, before everything's even spoken in a sermon, the song starts and they just see the words and think, God, yep, I got totally distracted. I tried to make it all about me. I tried to move that needle all by myself. God, thank you for bringing me back here. And the other side of the coin is to those of us who just church is a habit, right? You just, church is someplace you go. It's not a temptation not to go. Of course you go to church. You're afraid that if you didn't, your mother would come and give you a hard time and ask, why aren't you in church? And so of course you go to church. It's a habit. It's just something we do. The temptation for this group is to, like I said, make church about me. There's a strong temptation when you're a habitual churchgoer to say, yeah, this church is okay, but man, I can't stand that carpet, and the coffee doesn't taste very good, and I didn't like what the pastor was wearing today, and did you hear what the worship team did now? And there's a temptation to make it about us. I didn't like that, and I wish people could get their act together. And we need to remember, this is not a service for me. This is my service to God. Amen? It's us coming together, offering ourselves to him and saying to God, you are rightly God, and I am rightly your servant. And I am going to give you all the glory and all the honor and all the praise. Not me, I'm giving that to you. And we come together and renew our relationship to him. Well, today as we close, we're going to, the first Sunday of the month here at Centerpointe, we celebrate communion together, and we're going to do that today. And communion is just the physical act of acting out our commitment to him, of renewing our relationship to him. We stop for a minute and we recognize Jesus did all this for us. He gave himself for me. He gave himself up utterly for me, to cleanse me of my sin, to forgive me, and to bring me into a relationship with him. And when we remember what Jesus did, we also recommit ourselves to him, and in our hearts, we examine our hearts and say, God, I need you. I still need you. I want to renew. I want to start over. Let's refresh. Let's commit ourselves back to him.